Is Suella Braverman's own ethnicity pertinent here? Do you think that a white Home Secretary would have been able to make these comments with a degree of impunity?
I don't think any of my colleagues can use the pigment in the skin as some sort of a defense mechanism to say they're not racist. Brown people can be racist too. And if your
are you calling
your language,
are you calling the Home Secretary racist?
I am calling her rhetoric racist. I am. And I'm supporting the letters which call her rhetoric racist. And I think and I say that as somebody who was subjected to racism growing up, in the 70s and 80s. This is not a term that I use loosely, and it's certainly not a term that I use easily when I talk about another woman of colour, another parliamentarian of colour. But I think that somehow we have to call this out, just because people of all colours and all backgrounds and all sexualities can be homophobic, and people of all backgrounds, sexualities and colours can be racist. We only have to look across at what happened in places like Burma, where people kind of thought Buddhists couldn't be violent, and then we saw what happened to the Rohingya community. We look at racism existing today in Modi's India, and the violence that minorities, including Christians and Dalits and Muslims, are subjected to show that there is just clear racism at play. And so I just think it is important for us to call this out, and for us to say that just because you are a politician of colour does not mean that you can engage in language which a politician who's white would not be considered acceptable. That language would not be considered acceptable for them to use. But also remember, Jim, she's the Home Secretary. She should be using her words carefully. She should be measured. Her policy making should be rooted in evidence. She should be thoughtful. She's responsible for the security of our country. We need a grown-up in that role. We certainly don't need somebody who's trying to, perform some sort of Trump tribute act.
I don't want to rehash.
Tell us how's it going.
I don't want to rehash this, the Brexit argument, but what I will say is it's pretty sick making the relish with which politicians enjoy looking, describing and rubbing our nose in how bad they say it's all going. I don't think any Brexiteer with, two brain cells to rub together thinks genuinely that we're in a rosy, sunlit uplands, whatever it is.
Constructive change
and
as to where you would take
hang on
Brexit.
A minute,
That's
Tobias.
The question.
Hang on a minute, Tobias. I haven't been in Westminster making the calls. I tell you, if I had, there'd be a lot of
things
that were
different.
different.
You just said you're a Brexiteer.
But I don't have any.
We all are living with Brexit.
Hang on.
I'm saying this model of Brexit's not working.
Hang
so
on.
tell us, how do we change?
Let us speak.
I know. I'm used to Remainer shouting at me, and don't worry about
I'm not a Remainer.
But
I'm a post-Brexiteer. We're all post-Brexiteers. The fact that you label
Tobias,
people...
let her speak, please.
But the thing is, as I was saying, I don't think anyone thinks we're living in a one that I've just described how bad the cost of living crisis is. No one thinks that things are going well. The point is, I'm not sat in the House of Commons making policy or making law. Part of the Brexit vote, the excitement of it was giving more democracy to ordinary people, to your average Joe and Jane. And unfortunately, what this government has done, and with no help from the opposition coming from the sidelines, is make a complete hames of it, has made a total mess of any kind of potential that we could have had.
That was all...
By spending, hang on a minute, by spending, I know you can laugh.
But it was always going to be the Brexiteers' argument when it didn't work. Well, it could have worked if you'd done that.
So what would you do differently?
The scorn in this room is unbelievable. And actually, to be serious for a second.
I'm curious.
To be serious for a second.
You're not very curious because you won't let us speak.
The things that could have been differently is that you could have had politicians take seriously the exciting prospect of voting citizens wanting to be more involved in politics, looking at big things like sovereignty, big things like democracy, talking about how we could change British politics for the better. That take back control slogan might have been slandered as some kind of ridiculous Nigel Farage side of the bus, whatever it is. And you can go down that route if you want. Or actually, if you cared about, as you seem to opine like you do, about the average, person who, you say, oh, it's so bad, they're going to food banks, oh, it's so terrible, everyone's a hard time. If you actually cared about their political prospects and the future of their political lives, you would have taken seriously the challenge that Brexit set the British political class. Unfortunately, it has been squandered, and I'm miserable about that. But what I will not accept is that it's somehow our fault, that it's the fault of voters in Bolton or in Tottenham.
Nobody's blaming the voters.
Nobody has said that. For you to sit here, hang on a minute.
Nobody has
said that.
You
are
putting
words into people's mouths and then saying that they're our views and they are not. This is ridiculous. For you to sit here and scoff and say,
I'm not scoffing. I want to know what you do better. I'm still asking this, but Ian's going to tell me to shut up again. I want to know what will change.
Anyway, let's move on.
I'm going to tell you all to shut up.
Good morning. I was going to say, from a perspective of a student myself, for example, I'm in year 11 right now. I'm doing GCSEs, and I'm like,
you're in year 11?
I am.
Man alive, you sound about 25.
Thank you.
You're 16. You're 16. Wow.
I am. Well, let me give you my points of views in this right now. So I do politics and citizenship at school. And every single day I go to lessons, well, not every single day, but most days I go to lessons, and the teacher, she's a left-winger. She talks about her political views, she talks about how she's a feminist, and whenever we try and contrast anything about it, we're always returning the same argument of, let's remain civil and everyone is happy that we live in such a nice society. You know, we're talking about Brexit, and then people start calling Nigel Farage quite rude words,
Right.
And then the teacher just let it go on. But now I'm too scared to be speaking about my right-wing views, my normal right-wing views, Even I wrote about migration, illegal migration in my essay, and guess what? I got returned that and getting 2 marks out of 15. I got returned giving an hour, a phone call home. It was chaos.
Hang on. You're telling me you got... What was the reason given for your low grade? It's not because of poor spelling or grammar?
No. Well, it was about apparently in talking about illegal immigration is something that is quite extremist and is quite rude to disadvantaged or ethnic families. Right. So I'm kind of have friends from all over different countries.
Sure.
I can't speak something for everyone.
As a 16-year-old in Streatham, I'm sure you would have lots of friends. Absolutely.
And then I got told by your colleague just before about strikes. I feel like that teacher, she's earning well over £35,000. My family's barely earning over £29,000. They're still surviving in London. Teacher strikes are a joke. Teachers have beautiful working conditions. Their work. Don't start telling me they have to start updating the curriculum every single month.
I'm told they're marking their work until 11 o'clock at night and things like that.
No, I'm not going to have that. They say they're taking their exams home. Yes, they are fine. They can do some work at home. But teachers, they have, especially we have periods at my school. So teachers work for not every single period of the day. So they might have a lunch break to do some stuff. They might have, 2 or 3 hours of just nothing to do in the day to do their work.
I would honestly say that the majority of parents are really struggling to pay the fees. And in my 27 years as a head, we always made it possible for people who were struggling to have some kind of bursary or scholarship if their children really would benefit from an education at the school and the school would benefit from their presence. So 20% would be absolutely crucial. And I think that the majority of smaller, less well-known private schools would actually have to close or join the state sector. I mean, that's another option. But I think it would finish off all but the most famous headline schools, the Etons, Harrows, etc., which have enormous endowments. But the smaller schools don't, and I think they would close.
This is where the debate gets a little bit odd, isn't it? Because obviously it's a vote winner. If only 7% of people, and largely they've got money, who send their children to independent sector, if it's only 7%, the 93% are going, well, who cares? So, to have a proper debate about this is sort of difficult, because if you say private or independent to somebody who doesn't have the means to send them there, they're thinking Eton, they're thinking top hat and tails and a bunch of snobs and etc. It's that's the problem. That's where the debate goes too quickly, doesn't it?
Exactly. And to be honest, I don't even think the Conservative government are prepared to fight too hard on this one, because again, there are no votes in it for them. So I'm not optimistic about this. I think that It would be an easy win, a vote winner for Labour, but I think the consequences would be dire because, of course, they would actually then have to provide school places for the 400,000 or 500,000 children who were no longer going to private schools. So there would have to be a lot of school building, which would take time.
Yeah.
So I don't quite know how they would square that circle. I suspect there would be an interim phase where they put pressure on independent schools, private schools, to take children from state schools, to provide their facilities more openly to people from state schools, to consider mergers and that kind of thing. So I don't think it's going to happen full stop in the next 5, 10, 15 years, but I think there is an inevitability about it.
If you can afford to eat in a restaurant for 2 people, you can afford to see a private doctor for a one-off consultation. And the last time I looked, all the restaurants are so booked, I can't get a table. So I don't see any problem, particularly in London. I think people can afford to see private doctors, and if they can, they probably should, because we take an enormous workload off the NHS.
Well, some people say you're leeching GPs off the NHS.
Well, look, I've left the NHS, and you could. But do I have a moral responsibility to stay in the NHS? I don't think I have. Other people can choose to work where they want. We employ people who choose to come work for us, and they also work part-time in the NHS. That's the nature of a free labour market. I don't think we want a situation where doctors are really tied to the NHS and not allowed to leave it.